This is the Ball Talk Podcast, presented by Nachos and Analysis.
What's going on, Tiger fans? Today is Thursday, June 8th, and welcome to the 18th and final episode of Season 1 of the Ball Talk Podcast presented by Nachos and Analysis. I'm your host, Drew Archer, and let's talk some ball. The Tigers could not get it done this weekend. The 17-game win streak, the hottest team in college baseball, comes to a screeching halt. And with that right there, I'm paraphrasing how Coach Bakich described it after Sunday's game with Charlotte. It's like this team was going 100 miles an hour and then you just hit a wall. The sky was the limit for this team, and in 2 games in less than a 24-hour period, their season is done. So, not the way that the Tigers wanted to end the season. We're going to get into this weekend, the season as a whole throughout this episode. But it was still a successful season for Clemson baseball. If I gave you the option at the beginning of the season, before we knew anything really about this team, or I told you that this team would not only make a regional, but host a regional as a top national seed, win the ACC, I think you'd take that option in the first year of a new head coach after the last 2 seasons that this program has had. So don't let the way that this season ended distract you from the fact of all the accomplishments of this team and where it ended up based on what our thoughts and projections were before the season ever started. So we're going to get into a lot today. But yeah, as I said, 17-game win streak is over. Tigers had a great run there until they ran into Tennessee. And what a game with Tennessee. The Tigers fell in dramatic fashion late. And when I say late, I mean late Saturday night in what was the most electric crowd that I remember seeing in Doug Kingsmore Stadium in a long time. There are probably a handful of Carolina games. Maybe last year specifically. I think that was when Clemson broke the attendance record for Doug Kingsmore Stadium. There were a lot of people there. It was electric, but in a weird way, even though Clemson lost, this was a fun game. I didn't like the outcome. But I had a great time getting there. I had a great time at the game. It was fun. I told a couple people, this game felt like a college football game, a big-time college football game. I sit out in the Cajun Cafe. I don't know what the capacity is, but I know what or how many people are normally up there. Let's just say there were probably 50 to 100 more people up there than ordinarily are. Not going to comment on whether those people had tickets or not. So Cajun Cafe couldn't even hardly move. It was shoulder to shoulder all night long. We delivered some food up to ESPN in the radio booth during the game, walking through the concourse there, the seating there behind home plate down the first baseline. It was electric. It had a feeling to it like you get at a big-time game in Death Valley. It was something that hard to put into words, and something that I haven't seen there in a very long time. But it was a big game, and the numbers prove it as well. Tuesday of this week, ESPN put out some numbers. Saturday's game with Tennessee got almost 750,000 viewers, which is a big number for a college baseball game. It is the second most viewed game on any of the ESPN network platforms ever. So it had not only the eyes of Clemson and Tennessee fans, but of the nation watching it. So big time game. The thing that ended up coming down to it, giving up a 3-run homer with 1 strike away in the 9th inning. Caden Grice went 8 2/3 innings. 8 2/3. Clemson went on to use 9 more pitchers after they pulled him from the game. The bullpen could not get it done. And the same could be said for Tennessee, because in extra innings, the game went back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. As soon as a team would get life, get some runners on, the other team would shut it down. Tennessee just happened to be able to score 1 more run than the Tigers. Tigers could not get it done. Then they had to turn around the next day at noon and face a tough Charlotte team. And the pitching staff could not get it done. I can't remember the exact number, but we saw a lot of pitchers Saturday. You knew it was over when Darden, who was supposed to be the starter for the final game, came in at the very end. And shout out to Charlotte's pitching as well. It was an eventful weekend in Clemson, South Carolina, to say the least. The events necessarily did not transpire the way Clemson fans wanted them to. But year 1 under Coach Bakich is done. And despite what we saw this weekend in Doug Kingsmore Stadium, as a Clemson fan, you have to be excited for the future of this program. We'll get into it in a little bit, but hopping on Twitter after the game and this weekend, people complaining, comparing Coach Bakich's team to some of Monty Lee's teams. You can't make those comparisons. All right. This team improved as the season went on. This team, though Coach Bakich in the preseason described them as the most talented team he's ever had, still had a lot of improvement to do. And the coaching staff did a great job with pitching. We saw struggles with the bullpen this year, but we also saw a lot of success with this staff as well. So the naysayers, they're just wrong. It was a great year. I'm excited for next year already. Unfortunately, we got a long time to wait till next year, but give it 1 more year of Coach Bakich getting his players for his system, recruiting-wise, as well as to the transfer portal. And I think we're going to see an even better team next year on the field at Doug Kingsmore Stadium. All right, before we get into more Clemson baseball talk, we got to shout out our loyal sponsor, Pump Monkey Septic Service. Huge shout out to them for being our show's sponsor all season long. Thank you to Alan Powell and Pump Monkey for supporting the program. And thank you to the listeners who have supported Pump Monkey Septic Service this season. Regardless, we've said it time and time again, this is not a service that you want to be in a bind and not know who to call when you're having septic tank issues. They're owned and operated by Clemson alumni, and they're servicing the upstate here in the upstate of South Carolina. They can be reached by phone or text message, so give them a call or shoot them a text at area code 864-710-2211, 864-710-2211. They're on Facebook, they're on Instagram, and they have the reputation of being able to come out and do the jobs that some of these bigger, more established companies aren't willing to do or can't do because they're backed up for a month before they can get out to your residence. So Pump Monkey Septic Service, give them a call, follow them on Facebook or Instagram. When the dump's funky, call Pump Monkey. All right, more Clemson baseball talk. The Tigers finished 44-19 on the season and 20-10 in the Atlantic Coast Conference. They're your ACC championship team, defeating Miami just last week in the ACC tournament championship. It's one of the biggest turnarounds that I've seen. If you go back to March, and I told you that we were going to be hosting a regional, winning championships, you would have thought I was crazy. This team had an epic turnaround, went on a crazy run, not losing a conference series since that sweep to Wake Forest. So a huge season in year one under new head coach Erik Bakich. You saw this team develop from day one. You could see a difference in this team from last year. And even when they were losing and not getting it done, all right, you could see some differences, some changes. A few weeks into the season, Caden Grice reemerges on the scene after not really being a contributor the last year, not since his freshman year. And you can see a huge turn in the success of this team after Caden Grice gets back on the mound. We've talked about it before. I think that a big part of Grice's success was getting back on the mound, splitting his time. And I don't know if it was a mental thing to where he is not in his head as much because he's got more to think about with being a Sunday starter. But he was a big part of it, and you can kind of track the success of this program along with his progression through the season. You have guys like Cam Canarella, ACC Freshman of the Year. You got guys all across the field out there contributing. Will Taylor. He had an exceptional sophomore season. So despite the way it ended, it was a huge first season for Erik Bakich. He worked with what he had, what was left after Coach Lee left, after a handful of players left in the transfer portal, bringing in some of his own. He had a couple of transfers from Michigan come join the team. So huge success there. Let's take a look back this season and this weekend. Pitching depth ended up being the issue down the stretch for the Tigers. You faced a Tennessee team that has an exceptional pitching staff, and you got outpitched against Charlotte. It looked like Cy Young was out there on the mound Sunday morning. Pitching depth has been a success and a thorn in the side of this team throughout the year. There's been a lot of highs, a lot of lows. You feel bad for Ammons after being out there on the mound to seal the deal for the ACC championship, to then turn around and give up a 3-run homer that pushed the game to extra innings Saturday night against Tennessee. Cam Canarella, his ejection, that ended up being a huge talking point throughout the weekend. I'll be completely honest, and I think this was the case for a lot of people. I didn't realize that he had gotten thrown out of the game till probably an inning later. I was talking to my family who was watching it on TV, the ESPN broadcast. They didn't realize it at the time. Evidently, both teams were warned at some point during the game about trash talking and that kind of stuff. And Cam Canarella running back into the dugout, I can't remember what inning it was, maybe the 13th, chirping at the second baseman, and eventually gets tossed for it. I was coming back from the bathroom and just overheard somebody say, Cam Canarella just got thrown out of the game. And next morning, Kyle Peterson, who was on the call with ESPN, he came up to check out the Cajun Cafe before Sunday's game, we were kind of asking him about it. He's of the mindset that it was an absolutely ridiculous call. He should not have been thrown out. My only thought is, what did he say? Maybe it was something so egregious. But Peterson, he said it could not have been that egregious because just like Clemson, this Tennessee team is very emotional. They like to trash talk. They really didn't react to whatever it was he said. So it could not have been so egregious that you had to throw him out. You saw a lot of emotion in this game. Tigers getting walked, getting hit, and slamming bats down, which personally I'm not a fan of. You saw a lot of that in the softball series with Oklahoma on Oklahoma's side. In a normal game, you're not really seeing people slamming and throwing bats like that, which, I don't know, me personally, I think that's a little bit more egregious than somebody chirping at somebody as they're running back to the dugout. So I don't know. That ended up being a really controversial call. It meant that Cam was suspended for Sunday's game as a result of him being ejected. You saw a couple of free Cam signs get confiscated Sunday. I don't know. I don't agree with it. I've heard all the conspiracy theories about the umpire and being fired for Major League Baseball and him having thin skin. I don't know. But it was a big loss for the Tigers on Sunday. Was that the difference? I don't really know. I think if Canarella was in the lineup, Tigers still probably would have lost Sunday, but who knows? We won't ever know. The atmosphere, I'll go back to that again, was huge. I had flashbacks of Notre Dame rain game playing in the air tonight right before the game starts. Crowd was electric. I went back and watched some highlights. It seems like it translated on TV. Doug Kingsmore Stadium was loud. It was rocking. There were people literally everywhere. You could not hardly move. You couldn't move anywhere without bumping into people. Folks sitting in the aisleways, people standing anywhere they could to see. Cajun Cafe was packed. Deshaun Watson was in the house. I imagine he was probably there for the big recruiting weekend for football, but he did make an appearance over at Doug Kingsmore Stadium with what I assume is his girlfriend out there. So I don't know how often Deshaun Watson comes back to campus. I can't remember seeing any pictures or anything like that of him really spending much time in Clemson since his time here. So that's how big of a game it was against Tennessee. Unfortunately, Tennessee is the more talented team. They haven't played like it on the road this season, but they found a way to play like it Saturday night. It was an emotional loss. It was a loss that went late into the night, extra innings, which doesn't give you a good feeling having to get up and play a noon game the next day. As someone who sits out in the Cajun Cafe and gets there a couple hours a lot of times before the game ever starts, if you've never seen this team's pregame schedule, they're out there 3 or 4 hours before game. They're constantly out on the field doing stuff, running to the locker room, running to the dugout, running out to the batting cages, out in right field. They are constantly moving, constantly going 3 and 4 hours before the game, and then have a game on top of it. So with that schedule, with a game that went as late as it did, they probably didn't get out of the stadium till after midnight, then having to turn around and be back out at Doug Kingsmore Stadium early the next morning for another game after an emotional game, an emotional loss. You had to figure there was probably going to be a hangover against Charlotte. And there was. We burnt through a lot of pitchers. We couldn't manufacture some hits or runs. And just like that, the season was over. It was a disappointing way to end the season, especially after that 17-game win streak, the fourth longest win streak in program history. But that's the way the cookie crumbles. I do want to shout out the Tennessee fans. Every Tennessee fan we ran into, talked to all weekend, ended up grabbing a beer with some at the SO Club, ended up hosting some of them up in the Cajun Cafe for that final game with Tennessee and Charlotte. All super, super great people, super nice people. We shut the Cajun Cafe down because why would we hang out up there and watch Tennessee and Charlotte in the finals? So many Tennessee fans came up there. We're super nice, hanging out, talking. We ended up turning the fryer back on, dropping some wings, cooking some hot dogs, that kind of stuff, and feeding them anyway. So congratulations to the fans. They traveled very well. And from my experience, we're all very respectful and awesome. So after that Charlotte loss, some folks from the cafe ended up taking some food down to the coaches, which is we do most games. They said it was the most emotional they've ever seen this team ever. I remember Seth Beer's final game, a lot of tears being shed, and you could feel that. And this was exactly like that. So this team really hurt after that loss to Charlotte. But one thing that you like to see, and I don't think he's coming back next year, and talking with people and just being at the stadium early for a lot of games, Caden Grice is usually the first person there, the last one to leave. When I returned back to Doug Kingsmore Stadium for the Tennessee-Charlotte game, guess who pulled in right in front of me? Caden Grice comes back, which he's a bigger man than me. After I just got beat by both of these teams, my season's over. I probably played my last college baseball game ever. I'm not going back and watching these two teams play for a championship. Caden Grice and a couple other folks came back to watch the game. So the 2023 season has come to a close. And again, I want to reiterate, this season was a huge success. Don't be fooled by the naysayers on Twitter comparing it to the previous coaching staff. This team, this program has taken a huge step forward. And as much as it sucks the way that it ended, Coach Bakich is not going to forget that. These players that are returning next season, they're not going to forget that. They're going to remember this next season, and they're going to do everything in their power to make sure it doesn't end the same way this season ended. But looking ahead, as I stated at the top, this is our last episode, final episode of season 1. In a couple weeks, I'm not exactly sure when, we will not have another episode, but I will be releasing a postseason episode with an interview with Coach Erik Bakich. We tried to get him on for today's episode. However, his schedule was pretty full with some meetings today, and then he's hitting the road traveling for about a week or so. So when he returns, we're going to do a one-on-one interview, rehashing the season, looking back at where we were preseason and where we ended up, and what to look forward to heading into the postseason and leading up to year 2 with him at the helm. So that is coming up in a week or two. So that this is your chance to, if you don't subscribe on whatever podcast platform you listen to, subscribe so that you know when this episode is going to drop. Follow us on Twitter. We'll definitely update you on Twitter there as well. So other than that, I'm going to be signing off for a few months. when it comes to podcasting. But my co-host Matthew and I will return for the Nachos and Analysis College Football Show on August 24th. And August seems like a long way out, but before we know it, football season will be back upon us. And Matthew and I will yet again be talking about some college football, which I love Clemson baseball, but I love college football more. So be sure to subscribe because we post both the Ball Talk podcast and the College Football Show on the same stream on all our podcast platforms. So if you're subscribed to the Ball Talk podcast, you will get a notification when episode 1 of season 2 of the College Football Show returns. So got that going. And then before I sign off, I want to thank you, the listeners. Thank you for everybody who's joined me for all 18 episodes, who's participated on Twitter, whether that be the polls or reaching out with questions and comments, and the people who've shouted us out and sent DMs and that kind of stuff about the show. Without you, I'd just be a random person talking into a microphone. But I appreciate you, the listener, participating and listening each week. We've had a lot of great guests. We've had both Coach Rittman and Coach Bakich on this season, as well as former Tigers. We've had a great guest lineup this season. Season 2 will kick off at some point in February of 2024, which again seems like a long way away. But that off season tends to fly by. There may be a chance that we do some interviews during fall ball. We'll post about that on Twitter. But other than that, Ball Talk will take a break and we'll get back going in February of 2024. Thank you again for joining me all season, and join me next spring, Join me next spring, and we'll talk some ball. Peace.